Good evening. It is Tuesday, 7:44. Welcome to Pump Up the Volume, or welcome back. If you're joining us again, my name is Luis Daniel Muñoz. I'm a medical doctor, previous independent gubernatorial candidate in the state of Rhode Island, and I am joined once again with my fellow co-host, many of which you know, and I think all of which you know, but one of them is joining us again after taking a bit of a sabbatical over the fall. So I'll start with Mr. Roberto Gonzalez, Executive Director of Steambox Rhode Island, and someone who is constantly pushing and punching and fighting for communities and for equity. And so it's great to have Roberto back with us. Thanks for joining us today, Roberto. Also, Pat Ford, founder of the Coalition Radio Network, which we're actually streaming through, giving us this medium here, and also co-founder of the Libertarian Party in Rhode Island. And someone who, even if you disagree with at times, at the end of the day, is truly in his heart, always advocating for people, for liberty, and the liberation of communities. And the reason I'm giving these long intros today is, we're at the end of this year. It's been a great journey, and I'm looking forward to next year. And I think it's just important to lift my co-host up. They all are really working really hard to get the message out and to support communities. So that's why I'm doing this. Also, Mr. Scott Rotundo and again, Scott, I always mix this up. So 990 WBOB. I think I said it in the right order. My brain always wants to say it in the other order. But again, Scott, independent media personality, advocate, has done a lot of groundwork in the city of Pawtucket and is obviously always looking beyond the city of Pawtucket and beyond the state of Rhode Island and bringing news to communities. And not with us today, but still in our minds and hearts, Mr. Bill Bartholomew from the Bartholomew Town podcast is also one of our fellow co-hosts. Bill is enjoying a nice end-of-year sabbatical, so I hope him and Gabriella are spending some quality time together, and again, looking forward to having Bill with us again in the new year. So today's show is really about a couple of things. I mean, let's just throw it out there that we continue to be within the surge within this pandemic. The logistical challenges associated with PPE in the spring are somewhat being mirrored in what we're seeing for vaccinations, complicated by the fact that there are multiple vaccinations, 2 as of now that have been approved, another that may in fact be approved, and the third will in fact be somewhat different in terms of how effective it is. Now, why is it important to acknowledge that? Well, the reason is that with logistical challenges, that means the ability to get them delivered, right, and injected in people, and the differences in effectiveness between one vaccination and possibly another that will be approved soon, AstraZeneca's, we have to bring to light that this presents equity challenges for communities throughout the state of Rhode Island. And what I mean by that is who is going to get it, who is going to get it first, who's going to get the one that's more effective than the other. We've seen some chaos and disorganization in healthcare systems already. We've seen physicians that are in hospitals getting the vaccine and physicians that are in private practice expressing concerns that they haven't gotten it yet. These are real stories. I'm not saying that they're not like anecdotal. Like I'm not surveying thousands of physicians. Let's acknowledge that these are stories that physicians are saying through social media, right, through personal relationships. And it's not, but there's stories that are being shared not only in the state of Rhode Island, but in states like New York and Massachusetts. So I believe that it is something real and something that we kind of need to think through and think about whether our state in particular is handling it well. So that's a summation, right? That's what Bill would normally do in terms of what has transpired over the past 7 days. I can give you figures around positivity rates, but all of that information is online. What I can say is, again, we are still in a surge. We may still start seeing cases. Let's see, it's almost 5 days after Christmas. It is actually about that at this point. So we will start seeing more cases for anyone that was infected during Christmas, especially those that maybe had started to see symptoms after 2 or 3 days and now are really getting to a stage where they feel like they need to go to the hospital. I don't wish that on anyone, but this has been the trajectory in terms of like the path of this disease, right? So that's what we'll likely start to see. So that's where we are. But we're also coming into a new year, right? And I think all of our hearts and hopes are in the potential that this vaccine and that our understanding, which has increased since the spring, can do to help us improve the quality of life that we all have. And to meet that quality of life, there are other issues, not only just healthcare resources, vaccination, but also people need money. People need jobs. People need education and safe spaces to go to. And I'm saying all of this because my fellow co-hosts, I want them to have the freedom today to really talk about what matters to them, what's on their minds in any one of these categories, or even something that I haven't mentioned. Because going into this new year, I think what it is important is that we all understand that while there's a lot of things to deal with, we all have something in us that drives us towards one direction more than another. And I have certainly tried to wear multiple hats in life, but what I know is that there are times where you need to focus, and where focusing can really help you make that, greater impact, whether it's at work, whether it's you're inventing something, or whether it's in advocacy. And my focus has certainly been, again, on how to get this information out and how to support contact tracing efforts and so forth. But I'd love to hear what my fellow co-hosts are thinking, where their drive is, and what the message that they would like to give to all of our listeners today, going into the new year. And also just to say that we're all lifting up a glass today, given that it has been a long year, that we want to take a deep breath, and that we all want to just savor the things that we can savor in this life, right? Great company, hopefully great food, and every now and then a nice refreshing beverage. so with that, I'm gonna hand this off to, why don't we start with Roberto, who hasn't been with us for a while. Roberto, what's on your mind after this long year, and what's in your mind and heart going into the next year?
I didn't think you'd have me back, man. After yelling about F the police and challenging some of the governor's committees that you and I participate on, I am thrilled that you would put me back with a microphone in front of me for the masses. So I appreciate that. Thank you, sir. My some of the things that are on my mind. I'll give you a quick three. I run an organization called Steambox, which is science-based, youth-led programming here, mostly in Rhode Island. And it became apparent to me very early on during this apocalypse that the mental health and well-being of my students was first and foremost. That was under immediate attack. It wasn't in the strongest place before the pandemic. Just given economics, given current event struggles, given race relations, but now more than ever, my students are isolated and really unwell in some cases. So I mean that's really what's on my mind. And as I'm looking forward into the new year, I'm wondering a couple of things. One, how are we going to take advantage of some of the innovations that we've developed during this apocalypse, right? So there's been a lot of really poor response. And you and I, Dr. Muñoz, and I'm sure our other co-hosts as well, especially through their networks, have been on the front lines and working towards some of the solutions. But we know that there have been a lot of failures, right? And some almost willful failures. In response, and certainly in the education field, because we are risking a lot of people's health to try to maintain a status quo. I'm not going to get into the nuts and bolts of why and who's right, but I will say that there are a lot of teachers who are expected to go in to work every day and work with cohorts of students under a plan that requires materials that they simply don't have. And they're aware of this, and their mental well-being is at stake. And the students are not only through empathy feeling that, but our students are dealing with their own challenges as well. But throughout that crisis, there's been a lot of opportunity to innovate, and we've been able to do that. And we've created a lot of strides for students who don't succeed with actually going into our broken, shitty school buildings anyway. Right? So we've created a lot of opportunities for other students to succeed and do it at their own pace. And I'm hoping that the new year and post-apocalypse gives us an opportunity to continue some of those successes instead of trying to go back to a system that we know is an absolute failure for a lot of our students. And then finally, on the social justice front, going into the new year, and I know we talk a lot about COVID here, and I know that's a lot of what's on our mind, and I know this is at the heart of what you are great at, but you're also great with some of the social justice issues, and we've encountered a number of them this year, and there still hasn't been justice for Jamal Gonzalez. He's the young man who was on a moped and was run down by a Providence police officer. There still hasn't been justice for Rashad Gomez, I think his name was, the guy who Sergeant Joseph Hanley had beaten down in Providence in April. And it's going to be really hard to get at justice, even with the community assembled, if we don't start to take on Leah Bohr. So my whole point is this, and apologies for going all the way around the bend to get here. We've got injustices happening with police in Providence, in our own community, but we have a system, the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights, which prevents us from holding these people accountable. Now, if any of us worked our regular jobs, the old jobs that we used to have, and we messed up really bad, if we assaulted a customer, or we did, or even if we were just really nasty people, we could get fired. But they have this Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights that prevents action being taken upon them. So they are protected in this sense. And I'm just hoping that, and I'm using this airtime to put that out there, that this is something that needs to be addressed. And I'm hoping that, I know I am working on it on smaller committees, but I'm hoping that this panel, this group here that I'm talking to, but also our community starts to become more aware of things like the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights, which is protecting them as opposed to the community that they're supposed to be protecting and serving. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you, Roberto, and thank you for bringing that up. I know that several of our shows back maybe 2 or 3 months ago, actually, we had these conversations. And what I'm surprised is that when the marching stopped, when the CNN and MSNBC coverage stopped, very few of those individuals that were marching amongst the crowds continued the conversation, right? And not only continued it in a way that brought it to light, but as you know, Roberto, it's really about a plan. And it's interesting to me that even to this point, there are political leaders who have not proposed specific plans, whether it's the Bill of Rights, which I know that there was some legislation around that specifically. So let me talk about what I mean. But specifically, those individuals that are saying defund the police and stuff, it's like, what would be the proposed plan, right? What percentage of the police force should reflect the community, and how does that percentage somehow influence the allocation of resources, right? Like, how do you incentivize diversity? How do you create a plan to get to a place where you want to? And what has been a little concerning, not a little, and really concerning from my perspective, is we know that there will be another march at some point in time, because we know that another injustice will happen at some point in time. But between now and then, how much will actually get done? So I'm with you, Roberta. We're going to continue to bring these issues to light. But again, unless we get leaders that actually can think through pragmatic ways of affecting change, unfortunately, I think it's going to be pretty circuitous. I think we can get there. 2022 is around the corner. But yeah, of course.
That's why I bring up the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights, because even if we set up a group of fantastic leaders, there's still blockades. So I wanted to bring that to light. I wanted to put that on the table in front of all of us so that we can say, hey, if we can attack this and if we can knock down this wall, then the few leaders that we do believe in, that are in place, then they can have something to work on and they can have some ground to stand on.
Awesome. Thanks, Roberto. So I just want to say this. I don't want everyone to feel forced to talk about something different. We can build off a conversation, but I do want you all to feel comfortable in expressing what's on your mind and in your hearts this year and going into next year. To also feel comfortable doing that as well. And we can always try to bring this full circle back. I'm sure that there are bridges, right, between what we're all going to say. So, Scott, would you like to go next?
Sure, thanks. I've got a few things to hit on. A couple of them are going to dovetail with Roberto's. The first one I want to talk about is police, and as you mentioned, the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights. I think it's something that was started probably for the right reason, because like a police officer shouldn't be a political assignment, if you will. Like if there's, let's say I become the mayor of Pawtucket, I shouldn't be able to like put my brother in as a police officer and take, you know what I mean? So maybe in that sense, it was started as the right thing. But Roberto, you're right. I think I read somewhere that in fact, for a police officer to be fired, it's almost like they go before a tribunal of other police officers. Now, how likely are they to, unless it's something egregious, how likely are they to turn on one of their own? Something I'd like to see, and Roberto, I'd particularly be interested in your thoughts on this. And I think I've mentioned this on a show before, and I've mentioned it on the Rotunda before. What I'd like to see, like you said, if you or I assaulted a customer, or something like this in our jobs, we'd be fired, we'd be gone. In my position as a financial controller, there's special insurance that I have to have. So if I made like a really bad mistake that really hurt my company, that would pay for it. Two things I'd like to see: police officers having to carry that kind of special insurance for that kind of assault, and also, like, keep this in mind, right? So for Jamal Gonzalez or anybody who's injured, and the poor kid's in a coma as a result of the police, if his family sue the police, and let's say their judgment, let's say they get call it a $10 million judgment, they take that judgment, hand it over to the municipality, and they have to pay. What I would like to see in cases like that, pay it out of the police officer's pension fund. Wait and see how quick they will start to self-police themselves, because I do believe there are a lot of good cops out there. There's good and bad in every group of people, and this would help the good ones weed out the bad ones. Because I don't know about you, I wouldn't want my pension taking a hit because some guy on the other side of town was a scumbag racist and choked a guy out like we saw in Minnesota. So that'd be number one. Number two, also shout out to the educators. I'm married to an educator. Just what they've had to deal with this year, I think is just tremendous. I frankly don't know how any of them are doing it. You talk about changing goalposts almost on a weekly basis, and just the way that within a week they had to pivot almost their entire, because teaching is always done in person with the students, and to pivot that to virtual. I don't want to sound like an apologist for the education career, but it was pivoting. It was to be to the degree of saying, okay, Scott, you've been a financial controller for 20 years. Now here's a forceps and a knife and a scalpel. Go to open heart surgery. Like that kind of a sea change. The third thing I want to bring up, I mentioned this in the preamble to the show. I wish it was a funny story. Unfortunately, it's not. Truth really is stranger than fiction sometimes. Believe it or not, the Rhode Island GOP is alleging voter fraud in the state of Rhode Island because their candidates didn't win. Most of the candidates don't win. In particular, Bob Lancia, he lost to Jim Langevin by over 50,000 votes, and he's claiming that mail fraud cost him the election. I just did a quick analysis of the percentages. He got 42% of the vote to 58 for Langevin. If there was voter fraud, it favored Lancia, because I think that's the closest I've seen a race that Jim Langevin's been in. So, like, bro, what are you talking about? And if there really was this voter fraud, because I think that allegations do need to be taken seriously, let's look at the evidence. The Speaker of the House, arguably the most powerful politician in the state of Rhode Island, was beaten like a drum by a first-time candidate. In Cranston, where I believe it's more Democrat than Republican, even though Republicans have held the mayoral office, Ken Hopkins beat the heck out of Maria Bucci by a 2-to-1 margin. In Warwick, an independent, Frank Picozzi, the guy with the Christmas displays, 2-to-1 margin over an incumbent mayor. If there's fraud, explain to me. So what? They just did fraud in one race, and they puffed you up to lower your margin of loss. I don't get it. And he's raising funds off this, which is, I think, despicable. And the last point I want to say, we have a couple of days left in 2020. I raise my glass to 2020 going out and to 2021 coming in. And my sincere wish is that 2021 compared to 2020 is very boring. and far less interesting than this year has been. I hope it's interesting for the good reasons, but I hope it's boring for all the. I don't think I have to get into everything we've been in, and that's my piece.
Awesome.
Well,
Thanks,
if Wonder
Scott.
Woman was any indication, movies are going to start off on a boring run. Thank you for the shout out to the educators, because I completely agree with you. I had several more points, but man, I want to hear from my homies too. Sorry for jumping.
My turn?
No, feel free. Feel free.
Okay, I'm working.
Yeah, well,
I'm working on the shyness thing, guys.
yeah,
okay. Boy, I've been waiting for this moment for a long time. What I'd like to talk about today to the class is the Twitter rant, self-described rant, that none other than Ashish Jha, the head of dean, if you will, the head honcho, as we say in the coalition, the commish of the Brown University Department of Public Health, and arguably one of the big national voices on COVID, as well as, well, just a big national voice on just about everything. He's a pretty smart guy. Doesn't need me to tell him that. One of the reasons why I loathe government, and I loathe government's involvement in, well, just about everything, are examples like this. All right? And I followed him with sort of a jaundiced eye, because largely he's taken a very institutionalized approach to everything, which makes today's Twitter rant all the more frustrating. And I'm going to quote, and I know that's a little boring, but bear with me, work with me on this. So a lot of chatter happening on the slow vaccine rollout. Personally, I'm incredibly frustrated. Did we not know that vaccines were coming? Is vaccine administration a surprise? Then, in a follow-up tweet, because it is a bit of a rant, first we were told in October that we'd have 100 million doses by the end of December. 100 million? Who said that? Secretary Azar. In the Hill, like 10 weeks ago, dude. Then by November, Azar was saying 40 million doses ready to ship out by the end of December. And then the tweet goes down and breaks down in finite, gory detail the outright failure of American government to manage this with any degree of efficacy or efficiency. Now, why am I criticizing what people right now are regarding this, excuse me, gentlemen, tonight? The cavalry coming to save us? Well, government hijacked the delivery of American medicine and its payments for said system, 20, 30 plus years ago. Things haven't gotten better. Despite an astonishing array of technological enhancements and changes, the actual administration of delivery of payment for American healthcare has imploded, along with just about everything else government touches. Now we'll say, oh my God, capitalists are going to make money off of healthcare. Well, what do you think the damn government does? You think they're doing this at cost? No, they're not. Well, if we have private industry do it, there'll be people who make obscene amount of money. Have you seen government payrolls lately in Rhode Island and here nationally? Well, if private industry owns it, there'll be cutbacks based on profiteering. Have you seen what the federal government and by and large many state governments have done in this vaccine rollout, and well, just about everything else they've touched? You know, Roberto and I have found kind of common ground on Providence schools, and there's an analogy to be drawn here. You know, I probably about halfway into the first season, hopefully many will pump up the volume, came to the conclusion that, well, things really can't get worse. Notice we didn't say can't get much worse. Things can't get worse. I don't know if it's possible to screw things up as badly as government healthcare has done throughout this entire episode at each individual opportunity. And what's impressive, the only thing impressive about the American government's response to this crisis is the sheer tenacity, eye on the ball, focus on being utter failures. Private industry when finally released from some of the fetters and the chains of government, managed to produce, and again, using technology that didn't exist a generation ago, managed to turn around potentially multiple vaccines, different approaches to a world-endangering disease in a matter of months, not years, months. I predict that it will take longer to deliver this damn vaccine than it did to invent it. And that is a sad commentary on where we've come as a country and our reliance on this utterly failed government. That's what I have to say this evening.
Thanks, Pat. I hear what you're saying. I want to add an element just to we gotta put this out there though. Like, if this process were run by physician operators, and there are thousands of physician operators out there, meaning people that are physicians that understand business, understand how to scale operations, how to sit at that negotiation table with insurance companies. There are some hospitals that are run by MD, MBAs, right? And they are run more efficiently. Their adoption of technologies that improve workflow is more effective, right? There's evidence to show that physician operators, executives can actually do better jobs than some business person that's stepping in to a role to manage a hospital when they're coming from the car industry or something equivalent, right? So, I mean, that's an exaggeration, but what I'm trying to say, Pat, is government's role in this crisis was not reflective of the analogy that I presented, which is physicians that run hospitals, physicians that run operations. That's not what we saw. And so let's just to acknowledge it here as well, I do believe that there is a balance, that if we could strike a balance between private and public, healthcare, we could see more competition. We could see prices reduced. We could see more accessible healthcare without sacrificing quality. But let me put this out there as well. At this point in time, given the number of barriers that have been set up for competition, from the regulatory process to, at this point, even infrastructure around research and development, right up to the logistics, right? Meaning some of these contracts that McKesson and Cardinal, who actually distribute these vaccines, have with hospitals and pharmaceuticals, are actually, in some cases, even exclusive to any potential competitors, right? So even if you could compete, can you even get it to people? Given that that's the infrastructure that exists today, I actually think that that is showing an extreme crony version of capitalism, right? Like, it is showing monopolies, and monopolies have hurt communities in this crisis as much as inefficient government has. I just want to point that out. You know what I mean? Like, the distribution channel for medical supplies and pharmaceuticals, primarily driven by McKesson, AmerisourceBergen, and Cardinal Health, have also failed Americans.
And let me jump in on that. Let me jump in on that for a second, because I agree with you. But who created the opportunity for those monopolies? Yes, by and large, it was government. You see, capitalism doesn't exist in America. Crony corporatism does. And until you give greater free market opportunities, which, by the way, in this case, would have meant planning ahead, because most national security experts who are based in either pharma or biology, if you will, or medicine or public health, have agreed that this is, this train was coming for a long time. It was just a matter of a statistical inevitability, if you will, of something like COVID hitting. It's given the conditions.
It won't be the last time, will it?
No, it won't be. So the failure of government, who, again, I want to point out, the government broke a lot of this stuff. It's government's control of healthcare delivery that has created things like, laws where you have to be given permission to add capital to your expenditures to your private hospital. They passed laws which limit the number of participants. They've gotten in the way of people competing, and that's capitalism. what we do now as a government is not capitalism. It's corporatism. And it's cronyism, and it's disgusting, and it needs to end. So I just don't want people to be mixed up by those two, because, you know, if there is not free market competition and there are not lower costs, it is single-handedly the effort of government and connected people, individuals within government, who have created an unlevel, biased playing field and have injected barriers to entry. And that's my frustration.
And I understand, like, I mean, this goes, well, you're talking about something that has been built out for decades, right? I mean, it's gotten worse, just as much as when we talk about systemic racism and what that means, and how, it's infiltrated institutions, right? Like, I mean, that's how deep some of these issues are. But from a pragmatic standpoint, I think we have to acknowledge that if we want to change things, I personally think at this point, it's probably easier as a first step in 2021 to really deal with this distribution channel monopoly that we have in this country, and to find ways of incentivizing more competition to ensure that of the great and many products that we have developed and that we essentially, import in this country, that we can get it to communities in need, and really at the local level, which I've always continue to advocate for, a more robust community health system, which here in the state of Rhode Island, we could establish a great model for the rest of the country to follow if we had leadership or have leadership eventually that's bold enough to do that. Also, you brought up some points, Pat, that I want to build off of here, which is, there on the conversation, Dr. Alexander Scott had a conversation today with all of the different news outlets, mainstream media mostly, seem to be talking. You have Motif and stuff as well. I don't know if you were there, Pat, today on that phone call, but there was a question presented about, whether patients that died for other causes but happened to be COVID positive were still being labeled as primarily dying because they were COVID positive, at least in terms of documentation, and whether there was a financial incentive to do that. And, I haven't looked at billing over the past several months in this crisis to understand how insurance companies are handling or working with hospitals. But it did that question sparked a more, practical question. So beyond the conspiracy theories around that, really the practical question would be, are hospitals finding themselves in situations where someone is coming to the ER, they're diagnosed with COVID, they have to get a workup, right? And that workup has a certain cost associated with it because there's certain tests. And so as a result of that, the way you label that patient, are hospitals being forced to consider certain codes to code against all of the tests that they have to do, and the patient maybe, unfortunately, passes away for something else, or gets, has to deal with another chronic disease that they have that's not COVID, but still, like, is that going on? That was my question. The reason I'm asking it is we're already seeing United Healthcare get into a big fight with Montefiore Health System in New York City. We're seeing insurance companies now trying to not pay their fair share, this is private industry, right, of the cost of care associated with COVID-19 positive patients. And when they do not pay, that falls on health systems. And if health systems can't cover it with federal funds in terms of the losses, they end up having to reduce either the services they're providing or increase the cost of the services they're providing to surrounding communities. So again, an equity issue, and much of which is tied in terms of its impact to private health insurance companies. So there is a private sector component on the health insurance side as well as on the distribution side that we really need to think about in terms of, like, how do we fight this as well? And I'm not saying fight in terms of destroying it, Pat. I'm not saying fight in terms of further over-regulation, whatever you want, when you want to use, but we need to address it in a way that we can better support patients and communities, because these healthcare costs are going to be you think of a boulder about to go off a cliff, and that's the economic crisis we're on. you get a bill for $5,000 to $10,000, a healthcare bill. I mean, you're pushing them over. I mean, you're pushing people over that cliff. So how do we protect them, right? How do we deal with this situation? That's just a question. I'm going to put it out there. We can go around the circle one more time here. This kind of metaphorical circle I built in my mind, and feel free to address that if you guys like, or just pose additional questions. I do want to make sure that after we go around once, maybe you can each take a couple of minutes. Then we'll have a kind of more of a positive 60 to 90 second statement each before the new year. But again, this whole thing is more about us just, again, having a drink, talking about the things that matter to us, and expressing what we hope for the next year. So what I hope is that we can deal with some of these issues and make sure that we save people save them from the burden of healthcare costs, right? So why don't we go the other way around now? So Pat, how about we start with you?
Well, I was pretty loud and clear. I just want to say this: there is so much low hanging fruit in terms of saving people money. Giving opportunities for healthcare companies, insurers to operate across state borders. Surely tort reform. I said it out loud in Rhode Island. Tort reform is clearly a low hanging fruit. Eliminating certificates of needs, creating more competition. And finding ways, obviously, to reduce the costs of doing business at large in Rhode Island. Every penny saved then creates more opportunity for equity in healthcare because, well, it's just less money, and then there are fewer barriers to entry for people with lesser means to compete for healthcare, if you will. We like to say, lots of people say it's a right. I just want to caution people about that because any type of physical product that requires the engagement of other individuals, the labor of other individuals, is not a right. Those people are entitled to compete for compensation, facilities at all. So the first step before we do anything is find ways to just lower the damn cost. Because quite frankly, we're about to get run over by a train of healthcare costs in a state that can ill afford it, in a state that's run by people who refuse to even think about cutting costs at any level. We are headed towards oblivion. But the first step is take advantage of the low-hanging fruit and find ways just to make it cheaper. And there are ways to do that without impacting quality of care. And in fact, quite frankly, more competition means more quality of care, which people then will have to perform at a higher level and compete on price. If it's worked in hamburgers and computers, it can work in anything.
Thanks, Pat. Scott?
Yeah, I think I just want to kind of put a little bit of a different spin, just thinking on the post effects after COVID is on the ash heap of history where it belongs. We're talking about getting healthcare into the hands of everybody, which is definitely priority 1, 2, and 3 right now. Afterwards, I'm thinking about the economic ripples, right? And what I'm worried about is, after 9/11, the stock market rebounded and people, I hate to say it for more lack of a better term, kind of went on with their lives. And I do worry about after the vaccine's out there and we've got the herd immunity and we don't need masks everywhere, the people that still have jobs and that were relatively unaffected, just going on with their lives and not realizing the effect of this on people who have been made homeless because of this. How many people, who own small businesses that have literally put their life savings into it, maybe generations of their life savings, that's gone now. And these people, like, how do they rebuild? How do the restaurant workers who have been, without steady work for 9 months, how do they, never mind rebuild, how do they even get back to where they were in March? I think, we're going to need to make sure that they're taken care of as well, whether it's job retraining or, I don't know what else, maybe tax credits to businesses who hire people who were displaced due to COVID. So there's some sort of quid pro quo there, but just something to think about.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Scott. I agree 100% with that. Roberto?
I don't know this stuff like you do. I really, I don't. On this when we're talking about education, I'm on the inside, right? Like, and I'm on the inside of a lot of the conversations, even with social justice. But when we're talking about vaccines, I am just doing quick math on the outside. And as I'm doing quick math on the outside, I'm going to need you to help me understand this and maybe help our audience understand this, because as I understand, Pfizer, announced efficacy rates, and so did AstraZeneca, and Pfizer apparently had less sales going to the U.S. So there's like initial batches and stuff. And yes, the healthcare workers, yes, right. My grandma, I hope she's on the next wave, right? And definitely like VIPs and people who are for good reason VIPs, or like in harm's way more than others. Yes, let's get that out to these people. But now as I start to, and again, I'm 100% with that. But now as we start to break down some of the quick math, there's math on both sides, both extreme, right? And I'm probably speculating, and maybe it's a little crazy, you tell me. But if the efficacy rates are really high on Pfizer, and that's why Pfizer is coming in hot and fast, and AstraZeneca is right behind it, and then some of the others are going to start to come in as we get less supply of those, and we still have all of this demand left. By the time it trickles down to my Black and brown students, right, and to my Black and brown community, and to the people to my neighbors and the people around me, what's going to be left? Is it still going to be the vaccines with the high efficacy rates? Those are some of the questions that I have on that end. And then I want to also take a moment and say, on the opposite end, as we have people who are, again, Black and brown people who are suspicious of vaccines. Yes, we definitely, society has a problem with anti-vaxxers, and yes, we want to move forward quickly, and I hope that we can. But I want to caution all of us. I want to caution all of us to take a moment in their shoes and take a moment to try to gain their perspective, because a lot of Black and brown people, my people, your people, Dr. Muñoz especially, have been burnt before under the guise of a vaccine, when instead we were sterilizing people in Puerto Rico, and other people have had much worse done to them. And I'm talking about Native Americans, and I'm talking about Black people specifically. So there is a lot of reason to have concern, and there is a lot of reason for people to be suspicious. I don't think that's what's happening here, but I just want to say to us, let's not judge those people so quickly when they look at us sideways, at a new vaccine.
And Roberto, for those who don't know the history of Puerto Rico, would you like to mention the organization that was doing that?
That was Planned Parenthood. Please go in.
Yeah. So thanks, Roberto, for pointing that out. And I think we just had over this past week a story that some of our listeners may have seen in the headlines, right? Dr. Susan Moore, Black female physician, who died of COVID-19, complications of COVID-19, and had expressed concern that she was being treated differently. And being a physician, understanding what treatment is, what quality treatment is, still her concerns were disregarded, independent of how the doctor expressed those concerns, being in a state of course, fear for her life. It doesn't matter what the tone was. The bottom line is that there were concerns expressed and they had gone unheard. And so I just want to build off what you're saying, Roberto. There's a long history, not only of these experiments, right? These things that if anything, those are the extreme cases, but even the subtle, passive inequities that take place on a daily basis. There was a study about the dispensation of pain medications, and it showed a difference in the frequency in which people of color were given pain meds when they needed it as compared to white people. There's studies to show these things. And so I just want to point this out. There's generational trauma that is a result of the healthcare system treating vulnerable communities differently. And yes, I agree that we're seeing the impact of that mistreatment in communities today, especially those individuals that are not too eager to get the vaccine, at least not in the first wave. And there's some work that needs to happen on the ground in terms of leadership and community leaders to address that. But there's even more work that needs to happen within the healthcare system to address that issue. Because again, within the healthcare community itself, we still see the very passive racism that we have acknowledged and called out in government structures. So, and that's, yeah, I said it. So it's just in case anyone's listening. And you know, I also want to point out that one of the things you mentioned, Roberto, about Pfizer. So I'm going to give a quick summation here for the audience, and we'll probably have 4 or 5 more minutes here going over just a bit. But efficacy, when we talk about efficacy, it's essentially safety. So is it safe to take the drug? When we talk about effectiveness, or the vaccine, that is. When we talk about effectiveness, is how effective is a vaccine in helping you build an immune response to the virus so that you can survive it, right? So preparing your body to fight the virus, right? So efficacy and effectiveness. So these things were pushed through the efficacy stage, right? So the idea is they're safe, you know, they're not killing thousands of people. So now what we really wanted to get to is how effective are they, right? How effective are they at helping you build your immune response to prepare you to fight the virus? Now, we look at Moderna and Pfizer, and we see similar effectiveness, right, in terms of helping you build that immune response. But there's some indication that Moderna might actually prevent you from getting infected, which is different. Pfizer helps you build an immune response to fight it. Moderna does that, but Moderna may possibly prevent that virus from getting into your cells and replicating. Now, that when you look at that, it's not really apples to apples. So already the question becomes, who gets Moderna and who gets Pfizer? What if I want Moderna? Do I have a choice? The answer from Dr. Chan in the state of Rhode Island is no one gets a choice. The answer was a little more gray. It was like, well, kind of yes and kind of no. But the short answer is no. For the general population, you do not get a choice. The choice might be, do you go to this hospital versus that hospital? But that's not a choice. As we know, that's an equity issue, right? Because what if you're not born in that particular area or living in that particular area to get to that hospital? And then there was another issue here, which is Trump didn't want to pay for more Pfizer vaccines. That came out. That's a real political narrative out there. But let's be clear here. Pfizer would take more money if it could. And I think we have to be very careful in this country with allowing pharmaceutical companies to do what they want. We know that the pharma industry in the past has taken an essential medication for HIV patients and raised it by 800% to make a profit. Yes, these are the types of pharmaceutical companies we have in this country. We need to be very careful with price gouging, even with vaccines. And that goes to the last kind of summation of concern you've expressed, Roberto, which is if I think price is going to be an issue here. I think eventually, if the logistics and general distribution of this drug doesn't happen in a timely manner, and we ultimately decide as a country, as a state, to not invest the same amount of money in the same particular vaccines, but instead in a lower grade, less effective vaccine like that from AstraZeneca, then we will likely start seeing, and this is more of an assumption here, or you might call it a hypothesis, but based on history, it is possible that we will see the cheaper, less effective version get distributed amongst the general population, even the general population in highly dense communities that are already at high risk. And I am very concerned about that. I don't think anyone is hiding the fact that that is a possibility. When I say anyone, I mean the administration. So I think we all need to be prepared for that to happen. And then the question then becomes, how do we ensure that we continue to maintain infrastructure, healthcare infrastructure, in the event that 30% or 20% of individuals where the vaccine that's lower, cheaper, is not effective, that if they start getting infected, we can support them with medical care, right? Like that is a bit of a slippery slope thought experiment, but it's one that we should start to consider. And so as I mentioned all this and kind of summarize it, I want to point out that we have listeners today that had 2 questions. I want to address them very quickly. In terms of the mutation that we've seen with COVID-19 that makes it more transmissible, as of now, because it's not more lethal and because it hasn't been shown to have greater survivability, meaning it doesn't we don't really know if it survives longer in air. Is that the reason? Until we know that for sure, we can't say it's really a new strand, but certainly it's more transmissible. And as such, without there being a shutdown of airlines, it's likely that we're going to see that particular version of COVID-19 spread. We've already seen in Canada, some in the States, so we'll see more of it. In terms of single payer system, Cameron pointed out as well, my thought has continued to be, if you do not develop a version of a healthcare system that's economically sustainable, you can have as many ideals as you want, but the first communities that will be hurt by that system, if it collapses, will be the vulnerable communities, right? And so you want to make sure that any version of a healthcare system that it's widespread accessibility, that's widespread and accessible and high quality, is economically sustainable. And so my perspective has always been that the best way, the best first step to do that is to have a hybrid system. There are countries like Israel that have some of that, that have public options and private insurance companies as supplemental. But ultimately, even to take it a step even further, more narrow, to really focus on community health infrastructure, if you as a state do not have enough clinics, urgent care centers that are affordable and or free, that individuals can walk to and receive high quality care, then everything else that you say you want to do for all of the single payer people out there that love just saying it but not talking about plans, unfortunately my concern is that if it's not done well, the very communities you're saying that you will help will be the first communities that suffer from having no real access if a system like that were to collapse. Collapse meaning economically, meaning it's not sustainable, meaning a shutdown of clinics, right? And we've seen that. We saw that in the late 90s. There's a clinic shutting down. I don't want to really see it again. I'd rather we have something that's lasting. And so with that said, we are at time. I do want to give everyone 60 seconds here. And what I'm going to do this time around is I'm going to do a little bit staggered. So I'd like if Scott can lead us off. Tell us what you're hopeful for. Tell us, what you're going to be doing on New Year's, whatever it is you want to say. We'll go to Pat next. We'll go to Roberto, and then I'll finish up with 60 seconds.
Sure, man. Like I said before, for 2021, I'm just really hopeful that it's the opposite of that old Chinese curse where they say, may you live in interesting times. I'm hoping 2021 is kind of a boring year. New Year's Eve will, of course, be spent at home. We will probably go out to dinner relatively early. I'm hoping for some hibachi, maybe some sushi, just to live dangerously. And then, watch the ball drop at home. Got a 4-day weekend, and just looking forward to 2021. It's certainly, I don't think it can get too much worse.
Thanks so much, Scott. Hibachi sounds great. Pat?
First of all, stay tuned. In about 10 or 15 minutes after the end of this show, we're going to have Faith Dugan and Dave Levesque from two very different Rhode Island businesses talk about their experiences working with the government. And we're going to engage in some shameless self-promotion in a new segment that we're going to call the Coalition Focus on Business. As far as me for 2021, just want to let you guys know that I'll be working aggressively to end the government. Other than that, it'll be a pretty quiet year.
Thanks, Pat. Roberto?
Yo, Boba Fett is back. I don't know if you saw that, but Boba Fett is back. I saw the Slave One. You got to see how the Slave One works on the inside. These dudes, and I know we're getting into corporate bullshit here, and I apologize, but Disney had this whole rundown of all of these Star Wars shows that we're going to get, and all of these Marvel shows. Dudes, we're going to get Kamala Khan, who's Miss Marvel. We're going to get Riri Williams, this Black Iron Man. She's a 15-year-old black girl from Chicago, and she's freaking brilliant, right? We are going to get such dope Marvel and Star Wars projects, and the nerd in me can't wait. But Steambox also has this podcast, and we've been able to maintain our status, right? We have a dope high rank. And we've been able to maintain our status on Zoom, talking heads like you see in the Brady Bunch boxes right now. But man, I can't wait post-apocalypse and be elbow to elbow with my students again. They have taken this podcast to Studio Ghibli in Japan, to Toronto, all of these dope places. I can't wait to be out traveling the world with my homies again.
Awesome. Thanks, Roberto. And I agree. I mean, Grogu is it's a cool little fellow too. It was one of the best season finales ever. Yeah. But and I just want to say, thank you so much to all of you for the courage that you've shown throughout, way before I met you, right? But even in the time we've been friends, and I will say that we need more of this. We need more of this discourse. We need more of environments and government and an industry where people can have diverging ideas or different perspectives, though the same goals, right? And in terms of like, how do we get there? Because without it, where do we end up? Where do we end up? I think 2020, my hope is that it was the peak of what we might call this Greek individualism. But after this, I do hope that we see more collectivism, not to the extent that it's an extreme, but to the extent that we can at least sit around these circles, argue together, and have a drink together after, right? Like like they used to do. So in moving forward in this new year, what I'm going to do is I'm going to dress up and act like I'm going out, even though I'm not, and I'm just going to reflect on the fact that we made it through. That, believe it or not, this for the time we are in history, this has truly been an inner war as much as an outer war. Many of us have had to sit back and kind of come to grips with ourselves and our ideas and our place in a world that we can't even interact with. And I know that that sounds pretty profound, but I think that that's the state that a lot of people are in, right? And coming out of 2020, when the doors finally open and when people can rush out and take a breath of that fresh air when it's all said and done, hopefully at some point next year, I think that there's going to be just so many people that would have reinvented themselves, that will have this renewed hope and sense of purpose in the world. And so really looking forward to even beyond 2021, 2022, because I think that that's really where we're going to start to see the impact of that new perspective that people will bring. And without a doubt, I'm going to be one of them. So thanks again, gentlemen. Thank you to everyone who's been listening to us. We wish you safety, health. God bless you and your families. Happy New Year. Be safe out there, but try to savor the things that you can. All right. Thanks, everyone. Happy New Year.